All right, welcome back, everyone. You've already covered what's happening in Malaysia with our parliament. We've already touched on Singapore's own budget debate. We've already seen the difference between how Malaysia conducts its parliamentary affairs compared to Singapore. So we've already touched on the domestic and the immediate closeness of our neighbors. Now we're going to go a bit further because at Kopitiam Council, we always like to touch on the domestic affairs, current affairs that's happening abroad, not even in Asia, but around the world, Europe, Africa, the Americas. And this one in particular, we are looking at the 2-year anniversary since the launching of Russia's offensive into its neighboring Ukraine, the Russo-Ukraine war, I would like to call it. So much has happened since then. We've seen a huge international sentiment being poured out over what is happening here between Russia and Ukraine. It's a huge geopolitical conundrum that has a lot of European states paranoid. It has shifted a lot of perception whether or not the governments in USA is actually adequate or even qualified to be handling any kind of negotiations or any kind of situation when it comes to Russia. So we can see that a lot of the Western world leaders has already brought in a more militaristic stance in terms of utilizing NATO as a counterweight or counterbalance to Russia. This is not something new. This is something that was used back in during the Cold War era. NATO was poised to deploy or even undermine Russian military influence behind Iron Curtain. But now, I think in a way, it's kind of history repeating itself. So 2 years on, we've covered this situation many times before, but 2 years later, what do you think of this?
2 years later, nothing much in terms of, in the grand scheme of thing happened, but what important is how the perpetuation of Russia and Ukraine war will facilitate America and Russia in respective, especially this year, Adi, is their presidential election. So I think it served it's the timing now all makes sense that even this is the other day, Yanis Varoufakis, the Greece politician, he mentioned the other day that who is Joe Biden's best friend? He said Vladimir Putin. Who is Vladimir Putin's best friend? He said Joe Biden. And he said these two need each other, even though they don't like each other, because these two justify the existence itself. Without Putin, Biden is going to lose to Trump in no argument whatsoever. It's going to be a landslide. So using Putin as a threat to American democracy hegemony will be a fundamental for Joe Biden to keep pushing this until November or beyond. Putin, America and its allies, meaning a figure that we talked about the other day, some sort of a very assertive, a grand figure of Russia, so that no one in Russia would think that any other leader would or can do the same, standing up for Russia or whatever Soviet remains that they have in spirit of Soviet Union in the last whatever decade ago. So this is something that more than just meet the eyes. So these two anniversary of Ukraine war, and recently Russia gained another territory as well. So if you just look at Ukraine's map, it's basically just divided into half now. So without help, strong support financially from America and military support from Euro members, this is a fight that Ukraine not get. They don't afford to do so. So it's more so obvious than ever. The Prime Minister of Ukraine, some sort of a begging for aids, military aids or financial aids to be channeled towards Ukraine, and in order to justify that this is the frontier otherwise other Western democracies will be at stake as well. So reading into this, Adi, 2 years is not gonna be. I think it's gonna even last to 2025. We're gonna see presidential election for both countries, Russia and US, gonna take place. Crucial to see what's the aftermath is. I'm sure, like we joked the other day, who's gonna win Russia presidential election? It's gonna be Putin. For America as well. Yes, Trump is with Nikki now neck and neck. Well, some people neck and neck. Some people say Trump is all the way up. We can see Republican even more stronger now, and this will keep Joe Biden at night, looking at how the support rallied for Trump in order for him to get the GOP mandate to run for president. So this is bigger, larger than just Ukraine and Russia, and it will be interesting how NATO will play themselves, because NATO, as we know, consists of a lot of members, especially, and we the other day we had members, President Macron, Emmanuel, suggested that would not rule out any military battle, and it would invoke a reaction from Japanese, Poland Prime Minister, and Czech Republic Prime Minister. No, totally thought of table. We totally against this, and Putin responded also to Macron that any attempt to do so deal with nuclear weapon. So as you can see here, this is bark like a dog barking another bark, and then Putin gonna come up with the biggest bark, nuclear weapon. But of course, this all just threats that we see against one another. But more importantly, how stakeholders in NATO, including the US, we're going to play their part to maintain, and who going to be the winners and losers. That's how I would like to see 2 years after the start of.
Yeah, definitely. In a way, it is. I think when you pointed out that this is not going to be ended anytime soon, I think we're definitely going to see a protracted conflict happening here. For me, back then when the war broke out, it was either a very swift march to Kiev immediately, or it's going to have Russian troops digging in for a very long time in terms of conflict. And I think with Yevgeny Prigozhin, who mysteriously died in a plane crash, and the leader of the private military company in the Wagner Group, being able shortly before his death, saying things such as we're running out of ammunition, we're not getting the supplies that we need to continue the war effort, goes to show that there's some issue here with Russia's tactical logistics, or even having a wider strategy in terms of subjugating the other parts of Ukraine that is not how do you say, occupied yet, or fully, or not even fully occupied. But in terms of the some of the objectives that was laid out by Russia, which was to annex parts of Ukraine, which had, they claim, had Russian separatist elements that wanted to be part of Russia. I think in some ways Putin's objectives in this conflict has been fulfilled, because we've seen oblasts such as Luhansk or Donetsk, right, who was one of the first to face the conflict, suddenly having a very controversial election to using the excuse of self-determination, saying that we want to be part of, we wanted to be Russian oblasts instead of Ukrainian ones. So this could be used as, whether or not it's true, we still have to respect self-determination and sovereignty. But this does kind of present a very dangerous precedent, is that Putin can say whatever he wants, since, like, okay, well, people in Kiev say they want me, they say they want to be part of Russia, so we can annex it and give them the freedom that they desire, go there, change the, go do some manipulation of democracy or rigging the elections. And then it comes out suddenly, oh, Kiev does want to be part of Russia. So this is kind of a new playbook, like making the excuse saying that, oh well, self-determination, we have to respect that. Sovereignty, we have to respect that. The rule of democracy, we have to respect that. So it's something that Russia seems to have picked up on. It's kind of a ironic twist of the whole Western democratic model that the West and the US and the UK likes to harp on about. We have to be democratic. Well, a country can say, I'm democratic, so what's the issue here? So it's kind of, in a way, humiliating and trampling on these kinds of Western ideas and this whole Western liberalism here. But going to the idea of NATO, NATO's role in all of this, this does put it in an awkward situation, because now if that's the case, right, that means only a few select Western countries are being participative or even voicing out in this kind of situation. It seems like the rest of the world aren't really open or invited to any kind of how do you say, negotiations or even kind of talks. So, for example, like Malaysia, let's say we want to take an active role in trying to resolve the situation, right? Then the West, which is posturing in the way that they just want it to be within the West itself, wouldn't really want to accept Malaysia's situation, Malaysia's stance or Malaysia's contributions. So this is it seems like the West is content with keeping this very much contained within their own sphere to handle. They don't really want it to be open to other parties to, how do you say, get involved. Kind of like in most other conflicts, really, it always seems to be the West that has to resolve these kinds of issues. No one else should be involved or should even participate. And that kind of reflects a lot in many institutions that the West has set up in the name of preserving world order and world peace, such as the United Nations and the Security Council itself. So always, it seems we're still operating in that Western framework of who seems to be the one that calls the shots. Who calls the shots? It's mostly the West. And Russia seems to be content as well in trampling all over that, to dismantle that unipolar system and kind of pushing the way forward for one where Russia can be accommodated, powers such as China can be accommodated, or even in the wider situation, the BRICS can be accommodated.
Talking about Russia, Russia is actually the one use of power in the United Nations Security General Assembly, because they are around like 185. They're being used since the inception, and US around 85, and the others around 30 or in the teens of using veto power. So you can see that Russia it's played their card very consistently, that would veto the other four countries that try to do that. But it is the crux of why United Nations has failed, not just in the last 15 years, I think since maybe since the 70s, due to how they're going to veto one another in the country. And with the uprising nations like BRICS, UN going to be obsolete in no time. If US, as it's the big daddy of United Nations, wants to make United Nations remain relevant, I think they either should abolish the permanent member veto power, or expand that veto power to other countries as well. Because hey, countries like Japan or Germany are not in the permanent member, so it's not very fair. And we can see that UN is now more aggressive, or seems to be more effective in terms of how to tackle climate change or something along those lines. But to prevent conflict, which is its original function, it's failed to do so in the last years. So what's the point of having United Nations anyway if Russia just gonna keep vetoed if it's to protect Russia's interest, or America gonna keep vetoing if it's gonna involve Israel or Americans' interests. So this is a very funny way of doing diplomatic or some sort of combining all this multi-countries association into something that we call that, hey, this is our hope, come to General Assembly every year to put our aspiration in there, and so that we can act something on it, but nothing can be made. In fact, even certain things or climate change and uh, World Health Organization as well, in, see that is there really a necessity to. So I think if United Nations keep doing the same thing, no reform being done by, we are all looking at America now because America is the pillar of United Nations, and if they never change in terms of how it approach the uprising China or South Africa that already in BRICS, that Saudi Arabia part of this, they don't see BRICS as a threat. This mark the end for United Nations. Do you think so?
Oh yeah, definitely. We can already see a huge trend in regionalism propping up. You see more the idea of the BRICS becoming more and more prevalent. I mean, it was prevalent already in the in the middle 2010s, and slowly lost a bit of traction, then picked it back up earlier in the early 2020s. So that means there's always an ongoing discussion of the BRICS' relevance. But we can already see other kinds of regional associations, such as the African Union, or the EU, ASEAN, I believe the Islamic countries in the Arab is called OIC. So this would play more relevant roles in the future if the UN does not find a way to be more accommodating or to be more representative of the countries that are member states. Like you said, the best way is, of course, when it comes to the UN, the big discussion will always be the sanctions that the UN places, and that is only allowed, or sanctions can only be addressed at the Security Council. But if there's a veto power, which is mostly held by at least three Western countries, of course Russia because it's a European, and only one non-European, non-Western country. It's not very representative now, is it? Of course, it would be to expand veto powers to countries such as India, or countries in Africa, or countries, other kinds of countries in South America, or to abolish it completely, so that consensus actually has to be made between everyone. Because if someone can just throw out a sanction in the Security Council, and it doesn't take much for Russia, who is very gung-ho with the veto powers. So now, if you're forced, there's no veto, everyone has to vote. You're kind of forced in a position where you follow the whole reason for the UN, which was to go through diplomacy for conflict resolution instead of warfare. So that kind of empowers the whole idea of the UN if you go that route. I think that's the only way if you want to see some kind of changes in the UN and the dynamics of the UN to alter. And maybe, this is just me saying, maybe the General Assembly doesn't have to be in New York. It could be somewhere else. It could be hosted in other countries, so that this allows for more interaction, or it makes easier for, let's say, other countries to showcase that they are committed to hosting UN General Assembly. And it does foster more kinds of dialogue that way. Very interesting dialogue that way. This can be done, every time it's a different continent or something like that. Just throwing that out there. But how many situations have we seen that the UN Security Council has never been able to resolve any kind of conflicts? When has the Security Council ever been able to mitigate or resolve conflicts when it doesn't involve interests such as the American interests, which was very much involved in Security Council decisions in the Balkans, with in Kosovo, and for example. So in a way, the UN is very much contingent on the interests and whims and fancies of a very particular select group of countries and member states who does not exactly represent the collective aspirations of the other UN member states. So if, of course, the Security Council would have representation that's on a rotation, on a nomination basis, right? But when it comes to veto powers, is that means a lot of Asian countries would have to rely on their only Asian permanent five member, which is China, to if they veto anything when it comes to that's against the collective interests of Asia itself. So either we do away with the whole veto. I think the best way is to remove the veto powers and force everyone to actually interact with one another to find a consensus, which is the point of the United Nations establishment, because they decided that, I mean, for the reason why the UN was set up is that conflict has to be resolved in a way that doesn't involve war, because war is expensive. Diplomacy is a way cheaper alternative. So you create an atmosphere where diplomacy has to be promoted, and something that is very much championed, which the UN doesn't actually do in the context of the General Assembly or the Security Council. So if we don't see any kind of changes in this regard, then we'll see the rise of regional entities to become more prominent in terms of finding resolution or resolving certain issues, and this could lead to the emergence of blocks, power blocks, based on regional groupings. ASEAN could somehow find a way to find itself maybe in competition collectively with the OIC or other regional entities. So in a way, the UN will become irrelevant in that regard, because a block fighting going against another block is much harder to resolve, because there's so many components in regional blocks. But at least if you do it piecemeal in a way that, such as the General Assembly, everyone can get their voices across. So it's a waste of a platform. People just, like, countries would turn to other things that well, the UN doesn't do anything for me, so I might as well just go and create a new platform, collective platform, where I can bring member states, which is more relevant to me. That's the point of it all, really. Is if the group doesn't want, if the whole wider umbrella doesn't benefit me, then what's the point here? So that's just a huge rambling of itself. But back to you, Hafiz.
Yeah, I think other countries, also other organizations, should see this as an opportunity to overtake United Nations now, to be a world leader in a multinational organization that can actually function to its function, whatever funding charter that they have. So certainly this is not an easy feat for BRICS to be more relevant than UN, and UN would definitely gonna throw all in to stay as relevant as possible. So that's remain to be seen. I think in Captain Council we would like to see healthy competition. There's so much fuss being talked about that the joining of Saudi Arabia in BRICS, other countries as well, but things that can come up from BRICS is remain to be seen as well. Like, what could BRICS benefit not just their members, but also a global nation. So that's something that we would like to see in Captain Council. And I think for this episode, I think that's it for this 2 years of Russo-Ukraine war embassy. And his last word, Adi, before we end our episode.
Yeah, I think I went really on a tangent when it comes to the UN here. Other than that, I do hope to see some kind of resolution done with Russian-Ukraine that is able to satisfy all parties. Of course, in a conflict, that's a very difficult thing to do. But I would like to see more decisiveness in terms of international bodies in just bringing negotiations back on the table here. But of course, I think it's in this context, I can just easily say that there's a lot of Western interests here that seems to be guiding inaction or the action being taken. Going back to the UN, I want to say that how Western-centric it is. You just look at the initial member states. When it was formed, there was 45. So around 45 member states, not many. So it was easy to command, easy to hold on to, now ballooned up to 190 plus member states. So the framework itself was never meant to sustain that many member states, I believe. So reform needs to be done because it seems to be working the same way as it did when it was still founded. Of course, it's economic councils and other bodies, organs, which does all the climate change work or heritage or children's welfare kind of work is definitely functioning. Is definitely functional. So I wish for the General Assembly, the organs such as the General Assembly and the Security Council to be just as functional. But just from me.
Yep. I think just going to wrap up our discussion about UN, NATO, and Russia, Ukraine. So we will be airing, like, this is our latest episode for this week. And just a reminder to all of you who are listening to Freedom Council, it can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and now, even if you like visual, on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok as well. So please find us there, follow, so that you can be well informed with whatever that we discuss. With that, goodbye for now.